I never understood these myths or rumors that we have about certain Pokemon that are like, we have no idea what it really looks like. I mean, yes, for some of the more mystical Pokemon, that makes sense, because they can affect the mind more easily than most others. Some examples of those that make sense are Mimikyu or what the inside of a Shedinja looks like. But when you're talking about something like the subject of today's guide, it makes no sense. We have people that are actively raising and breeding them, scientists that have studied them over the years, and they don't even have any abilities like ghosts or psychic types that can affect another's mental state. I can only assume that these rumors are born out of ignorance, and that makes these guides that I make feel all the more important. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the vine-covered Pokemon Tangela and its evolution Tangrowth. Tangela is a round Pokemon that stands about 3 feet tall, or 1 meter, and weighs an average of 77 pounds, 35 kilograms. Tangela has a round body that is covered by blue-green vines that grow from its body, with 2 red feet that stick out from the bottom that kind of look like boots. It also has 2 eyes that peek out of the vines in the front of the Pokemon. And before we get any further into the guide, I'm going to point out that this is where the rumor that I mentioned in the intro comes into play. There is this weird rumor that exists that we don't know what the internal body of a Tangela looks like beneath the vines. It's just not true. Underneath the vines, Tangela has a round black body with spots where the vines grow out of. It looks weird, don't get me wrong, but it's no big mystery like the rumor says it is. Now, when a Tangela learns the move Ancient Power, it unlocks a dormant gene in their genetics, much like it does for the Swinub line and the Yanma line, or how Rollout allows Lickitung evolve into a Licky. This allows the Pokemon to evolve into a Tangrowth. The second evolution grows massively in size, now standing 6 foot 7 inches tall, 2 meters, and 283.5 pounds, or 128.6 kilos. And trust me, it looks like it too. Tangrowth now has a large ovoid body, still covered in the same blue-green vines, with 2 small stub-like legs at the bottom. It now also has 2 long and thin arms that are formed from the vines covering its body. The ends of its nub legs and the fingers on its hands are both tipped in bright red, with the females having more red on their fingers than the males. And yes, before you ask, we know what Tangrowth looks like under the vines as well. It's the same as Tangela, just a black body that the vines grow from. In all, some very simple biology, but does that simplicity translate into their care? Let's get into it and see if these Pokemon could possibly be the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. I'm sure many people, myself included, would think that these Pokemon tend to live in warm, moist environments, places like jungles where vines are more common. But in actuality, these Pokemon tend to live in more temperate grasslands with occasional populations found in temperate forests. And for our purposes, that's good, because it means that you could keep these Pokemon in your backyard relatively easily, so long as you make a few accommodations. One is space. Thanks to how these Pokemon eat, they tend not to move. These Pokemon are surprisingly omnivorous, eating not only fruit and plants, but also preying on small Pokemon as well. And they do this through the use of their highly mobile and extremely stretchy vines. Because of this extreme reach they possess, and the short stubby legs that can make long periods of movement tough and slow, these Pokemon have developed a method that's very close to most ambush predators, and in actuality is very close to how Lickitung feed. Because of this lack of movement, they don't actually have to have too much space for themselves. If you keep a Tangela in a yard that's at least 25 feet on all sides, or 7.6 meters per side, then that should be plenty of room for them. Now, Tangrowth is much larger, with better legs and a larger need for food, so they do actually move more than their previous evolution, meaning that they'll need a yard that's at least double in size, having to be at least 50 feet on all sides or 15.2 meters. It's quite a bit of space, but then again, like I always say, fully evolved Pokemon tend to take up a lot of resources to care for. Fencing should be good enough to keep these Pokemon in, so long as you get the fencing that are really tall and don't have enough space for these Pokemon to slip their vines through and pull the fence apart. The other thing that you have to focus on when it comes to their enclosure is the environment itself. One of the major factors you'll have to look out for is how wet the ground is. These Pokemon pull a lot of their water from the ground, so it's important for you to make sure that their enclosure always has damp soil. If you end up having a few long periods of time where you get no rainfall, or live in a place where you get very little rainfall all year round, then you may have to make accommodations for these Pokemon, whether that be through watering the ground yourself, or installing a water feature like a pond that can slowly feed into the surrounding ground. This also brings me to the second part of their environment, grass. Like I said before, the temperate grasslands are where you'll most commonly find these Pokemon. They use the tall grasses to help hide themselves from their prey. Now, I'm not saying that you have to allow your grass to grow to the point where you can't see your Pokemon and you feel like a Pyroar is stalking you. But you will need to have your grass grow to be kinda shaggy. I'd say that instead of the average of mowing at least once a week, bring that down to every 2 or 3 weeks, and bring the height of the mower up to the highest length that you can do. This should provide a comfy place for your Pokemon to live without your lawn becoming uncontrollable. And really, that's it. These Pokemon are fairly simple when it comes to what they need in their environment to survive. The last thing that we're going to talk about here are the other Pokemon that can be housed with them. One of the main things that you want to avoid are small prey Pokemon, along the lines of Caterpie or Rattata. Those are the kinds of Pokemon that the Tangela line prey on, and it's never a good thing to suddenly be missing another Pokemon under suspicious circumstances. And for Tangrowth especially, that list of prey expands to cover even larger prey Pokemon such as Raticate and some of the medium-sized bug Pokemon. On the flip side though, you should also avoid any fire, poison, or large bug-type Pokemon, as they can very easily cause massive harm to your Tangela evolution. You should also avoid any of the larger herbivore Pokemon. As we'll see later on in the care guide, it doesn't hurt the Tangela line to have their vines trimmed or cut, but if they're losing vines because another Pokemon is eating them, then that may lead to the Pokemon starting to panic and starting a fight. Really, your best bet is to have Pokemon of roughly equal size to your Tangela evolution that won't try to eat or fight your Tangela Pokemon, or your Tangela Pokemon won't try to eat them in turn. I know that really limits your pool of potential cohabitants, but I'm sure that there are some out there. It does seem like the Tangela line would be good to house with each other, though you will have to increase the amount of space for them. As far as I can tell, they aren't communal by nature, but have no problems being in close proximity to each other or sharing territory if that's what you want to do. Availability. Due to the restrictive nature of these Pokemon's environment, they haven't spread too much from the isolated areas that they exist in. They tend to live in places near bodies of water and in grasses, such as the northern part of Route 21 in Kanto, up near Pallet Town, or Route 13 in Unova, along with some of the giant chasm north of that, and Route 44 near Mahogany Town in Johto. There are also scattered reports of them being found in trees all around the Kanto region, though those are unconfirmed and unreliable at best, and then there are reports that they can be found in and around Mount Silver. Unfortunately, because that place is restricted to only the toughest trainers that have proven they can handle the extremely aggressive Pokemon and tough environment, there are only a handful of reports and sightings from that place, and the average person, or even average trainer, won't be allowed access to catch a Tangela there, even if they are available. And then, the rest of the regions don't have any natural populations of these Pokemon. Though, I should mention the Sinnoh region does stock these Pokemon in Pastoria's Great Marsh, which isn't the best environment for them, but also isn't the worst. Thankfully, in the places where these Pokemon do live, they have a fairly decent population size. If you go to any of the places that I mentioned, then you should be able to easily find a wild Tangela. Though, I should mention that it's mostly Tangela you'll find in the wild, not Tangrowth. It's very rare for a wild Tangela to learn the move Ancient Power and unlock their ancient genetics and evolve on their own. Most trainer-raised Tangela have to be put through some special training to help them learn the move and evolve, hence making it very hard to find a wild Tangrowth. Which brings us to the breeding scene, and really, it's not that much different than the wild. These Pokemon are very middle-of-the-road Pokemon to have, not too hard to care for or train, but also not the most popular Pokemon in the world. Same goes for trainers that use these Pokemon for battling. They are decently strong, but they aren't the most powerful grass-type Pokemon out there. So you end up with these Pokemon falling very much in the middle of the road when it comes to breeders raising them. If you want a breeder-raised one, which I always recommend, then you might have to do a bit of searching for them online, but they won't be too hard to find, and the Pokemon shouldn't be too expensive to own. The only thing that I might see being tough to get a hold of is Tangrowth. Finding someone who can do the extra training the Pokemon needs to evolve is fairly rare and not cheap, meaning that the cost of the effort and training is going to be passed on to you, and it might be a specially ordered Pokemon. I don't see a breeder going through all that hassle and cost of evolving a Tangela without a guarantee that they'll be able to recoup their expenses by selling it. Catchability. One of the major things to remember when you go out to catch one of these Pokemon is that they are very good at blending into their environment. Their vines are plant matter, and with them covering their entire body, combined with the fact that these Pokemon don't move too much, and you might have a hard time distinguishing them from the surrounding environment. However, aside from that, catching one of these Pokemon should be a very basic, standard catching experience. Aside from Mount Silver, these Pokemon don't live in very dangerous areas, so you shouldn't be in too much danger when out hunting for them. That being said, you should always be prepared for other wild Pokemon to cause you issues. Be sure to bring a Pokemon of your own to protect you and inform people where you're going and when you expect to be back. When it comes to tackling and defending yourself from these Pokemon, you'll want a decently strong Pokemon that has abilities that are super effective against them, which shouldn't be too hard to find. Grass is one of those types that has a lot of weaknesses, so anything that has fire, bug, poison, or flying type abilities should be effective at battling a Tangela or the rare Tangrowth. As for what to use to catch them, I would say that a Tangela straddles the line between a Pokeball and a Great Ball, and if you do end up finding and wanting to catch a wild Tangrowth, then you should absolutely use an Ultra Ball. Care. Let's just get food out of the way in the beginning. As I said before, these Pokemon are omnivores, picking fruit and veggies from the surrounding environment, as well as catching the occasional prey for supplemental protein and other nutrients. Meaning that you could go one of two ways. For those of you that don't feel comfortable feeding meat to your Pokemon, you could go with the entirely vegetarian option, using fruits and veggies and then giving them protein and calcium supplements to make up for the lack in their diet. In that case, you should give them about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of mixed fruit for Tangela, giving twice a day, morning and evening, or 0.68 kilos to 0.9 kilos for those that use the metric system. If you have them evolve into a Tangrowth, then you'll need to increase that to about 3 pounds of food a day, or 1.36 kilos. Same things, mixed fruit and 2 meals a day. And then for the supplements, there should be instructions on the back of the supplement bottle that tell you how much to use. It can really vary between brands and what kind of supplement. For those of you that don't mind feeding your Pokemon meat, or would prefer to use less supplements, then there are a few differences between the two. One is the amount of food they'll be eating. Meat is much more calorically dense than fruit or veggies are, so if you were to end up giving them the same amount of food that you do when it's just fruit, then your Pokemon will very quickly end up getting overweight. To that end, for a Tangela, you'll be giving them about a pound of food, or 0.5 kilos, with that being about 1/3 meat and the rest being fruit and veggies. This will still be twice a day. Tangrowth will cause that to increase to about 2.5 pounds, 1.13 kilos. Still 1/3 meat to 2/3 fruits and veggies, and given twice a day. Thanks to this, you'll be able to skip the protein supplements, but you'll still have to give them the calcium supplements. They normally get that from eating the bones from their prey in the wild, but that can end up being a major choking hazard, so I'm going to recommend skipping that for captivity. Oh, and you can really feed them in any old food dish. They should be fine just taking their food out of that. Moving past the food, one of the major parts of caring for these Pokemon is trimming their vines. Don't worry, this isn't going to hurt them. Much like how the Bulbasaur line shed the leaves or petals of their flowers, Tangela and Tangrowth both need their vines to be trimmed and cut back to remain healthy. Normally, in the wild, this would happen either through other Pokemon getting into a fight with the Tangela evolution or munching on the vines, or it would be through natural wear and tear as they use them to move through the environment. However, in captivity, this doesn't really happen as often as it does in the wild, leading to a bit of overgrowth in the vines. You'll notice over time that instead of a tight ball of vines surrounding the Pokemon's body, some of the vines are starting to stick out and hang out from the body, almost like when we get frizzy hair. They'll start to droop down by the feet and even get in the Pokemon's eyes, making it hard for the Pokemon to see. In extreme cases where captive Tangela haven't been trimmed in very long, then the weight of the vines could end up weighing the Pokemon down and inhibiting movement. Granted, that is more of a concern for Tangela than Tangrowth. You would really have to let a Tangrowth go for a long time for it to reach the point where the weight of the vines starts to affect it. As well, Tangrowth will use their arms, which are also composed of the vines, to tear and rip away from their own vines if left for too long. It won't look pretty, like going to a hedge with a weed whacker, but they'll take care of it themselves. Oh, and I should mention that Tangrowth, that because their arms are made of vines coming from their bodies, it's possible that the arms might come off as well. It usually happens in the wild when a predator gets into a fight with the Tangrowth, but in captivity, they have been known to rip their own arms off. I know that sounds terrible, but it doesn't hurt the Pokemon at all, and it's only because the arms can get too long and too heavy for them to use. It's not like bird Pokemon that get so stressed that they pull out their own feathers. That's horrible and comes from poor care and enclosure conditions. The arm thing with Tangrowth is just the Pokemon performing body maintenance and can even be avoided with proper trimming of the Pokemon's vines. On the plus side, moving away from that disturbing imagery, it's well known that Tangela and Tangrowth's vines are popular spices in Galar, and plenty of people find them tasty on their own. It might be a bit weird to eat something that you trimmed off your Pokemon, but if you want to sell it, or even if you don't mind eating it yourself, it's a nice thing to do with the trimmed off ends. This leads to the obvious conclusion that you'll have to trim the Pokemon's vines. Of course, you could always take them to a professional groomer. That would be the easiest way, if not the cheapest. But for those of you that want to try taking care of this at home, then you need to start small. You'll first have to get the Pokemon used to you not only being around it, but also get it comfortable with you touching it and handling its vines. To that end, you're going to start with the food. When you bring the food into the enclosure, try to get as close to the Pokemon as you can. These Pokemon aren't exactly known for being shy, even the wild ones, but any Pokemon who isn't used to humanity might be a little skittish in the beginning. Go slow, don't make any sudden moves or loud noises, and use the food as an incentive to get them to come closer. It might not work right away, but find out where the limit is for your Pokemon and work from there. Every day, try to get closer, and when you see that the Pokemon is getting ready to bolt, then place the food down and take a few steps back. Let the Pokemon come to you and to the food. This will help to reinforce the idea that, 1, you were the source of food for them here and therefore are a good thing, and that 2, you are not there to attack or threaten it. Over time, as the Pokemon gets more and more used to you, you'll be able to move closer and closer until you are within touching distance of the Pokemon. The same goes for getting to touch the Pokemon itself. Go slowly, speak softly, and use the food as positive reinforcement, and be gentle when you first start doing this. Be sure not to break off any of their vines at this point. Like I said, they might take that as you trying to attack them or eat their vines, and it might backtrack the training at that point. You want to establish a strong bond of trust with them before you ever try to trim their vines. Given enough time and patience, you will reach that point, but it might end up taking a lot of effort. The only thing that might be different from what I laid out here is if you're working with a Tangrowth. Tangrowth are much bigger and stronger than Tangela is, and therefore are more likely to be willing to stand their ground and get aggressive as opposed to running away from you. It's like a 50-50 chance between the two outcomes, but always be prepared with the Pokemon's Pokeball just in case it starts to make aggressive moves towards you. That's why it's usually best to do this training with a Tangela, and then, once you're sure that they're okay with you being around, evolve them into a Tangrowth. Less hassle for you to deal with overall if you do it that way. Cost. Because the enclosure is just your backyard, no special attachments, nothing that needs to be built or installed, then you shouldn't need to put too much cost into it. The most that you'll have to do is maybe have a fence or barrier installed, but I'm assuming since it's your yard that you've already had something along those lines. If you don't, then yeah, things can get up into the moderate or high range, but if that's something that you don't really have to worry about, then this should be in the low or even the very low category. Food will probably cost you the most here, especially if you decide to go with the meat option. The vegetarian diet with supplements will bring the price down, due to the simple fact that fruits and veggies are less expensive than meat. If you're doing the veggie diet, then you'll probably be spending in the moderate category per month, and the high category per month if you have the meat option. Also, those values are for Tangela. If you have a Tangrowth, then you should bump each one up one category on the price scale. The Pokemon itself shouldn't be too bad. Thanks to their easy nature and the fact that they can be very low maintenance if you want them to be, I don't see a breeder charging you more than the moderate category for a Tangela. Where it might get expensive is getting a Tangrowth. Unless it's one of the rare times where the Pokemon was able to learn the move naturally, then you'll have to send the Pokemon out to get specially trained to learn the move Ancient Power so that they then can evolve, which can end up being a very expensive process. And of course, all that effort and expense is going to get added onto the cost of the Pokemon, bringing the price for a Tangrowth up to the high or maybe even the very high category. Conclusion. I think these Pokemon would be good Pokemon for someone who wants a Pokemon that not many people have, yet also wants one that isn't a lot of work or time investment if you're busy. They're easy to care for, they can really take care of themselves, and the only major thing you have to watch for, the grooming, can be done just through taking the Pokemon to a groomer. The only thing that I can see being an issue for someone when it comes to these Pokemon is how they look and move, because I know there are people out there that can be creeped out by the prehensile vines they have. If that's not you, and you are looking for a simple grass-type Pokemon to take care of, then these Pokemon could easily become the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we talk about the caring, motherly Pokemon Kangaskhan. Have a wonderful night, everyone.